Hello everyone and welcome back to the Genshin Impact Preludes series. As I've said before, this is a series all about the backstories of the playable characters in Genshin Impact. I will only be going into the stories on the character pages, so there may be potential story spoilers for some characters. This also means I won't be going into the manga or story unless their events are mentioned in the character stories. Also, if you like this video, consider subscribing. It helps me out a lot and I'd really appreciate it. Anyways, today's video is all about Sucrose, so sit back and relax as I read you her stories. Sucrose may be the assistant of the genius alchemist Albedo, but they could not be more different in research direction. As opposed to studying the essence of alchemy and the ability to create new life, she is far more interested in using alchemy to modify existing life, all the better to add variety and color to this world. Despite her youth, she has already achieved some brilliant results. For example, she has been able to increase the nectar output of sweet flowers by 70% by irrigating them with a special potion. She has also developed a special spray that allows Sincetias to maintain their freshness for a whole month after being plucked from the branch. Even people who were initially suspicious of her research inclinations have come to acknowledge her exceptional talents in the field of alchemy after seeing such results. However, she merely considers these to be incidental steps on the path to a successful experiment, rather than the success itself. Her true aim is much more ambitious than this. It's a secret, and is also her little dream. Bioalchemy explores numerous lines of inquiry, all of which stem from Sucrose's questions about living things in the world. These questions, in turn, are born out of her insatiable curiosity, a faculty that is far more developed in her than in most. For instance, Sucrose's curiosity was once drawn to the sweet flower, accepted by most people as simply being a source of sugar. She wondered, although sweetness is clearly the most readily identifiable feature of this plant, should that be grounds for limiting its application as we have tended to? Does it not merit further study? So, after a careful study of the various features of sweet flowers, she devised 30-something distinct rearing plants along with numerous controlled groups to account for temperature and other environmental conditions. And yet, her experiment still underestimated just how many variations were possible. After the experiment began, Sucrose found herself with more questions rather than fewer, and the novel discoveries that her experiment yielded gave her inspiration for further research. Sucrose is incapable of leaving questions unattended to. It makes her restless, even guilty to ignore it. Spurred on by this quirk of her temperament, her rearing plants grew in number to almost 300. The result was a whole new series of sweet flower strains, some with thrice the number of flowers, some with heads 5 or 6 times the normal size that could even float in the wind, and some even producing a sweet-tasting fruit. Months of experimentation later, Sucrose had finally answered every last one of her questions pertaining to sweet flowers. As she finished up writing her research notes, she let out a long sigh of relief. Though she was physically and mentally exhausted, the sight of stack after stack of her bioalchemical research volumes stretching around 3 walls of the room gave her a deep sense of joy and satisfaction. To the people around her, Sucrose comes across as a quiet, introverted alchemist with little interest in the lives of others. In fact, the truth is quite the opposite. Sucrose is fascinated by absolutely everything that exists in the world. The only thing is, she finds the discipline of social interaction to be far more difficult to master than that of alchemy. In alchemy, the process of trial and error coupled with a determination to get the truth is sufficient to bring you to your answer eventually. But with interpersonal relationships, there is the added complication of having to factor in manners, moods, and other unquantifiable variables. To make things worse, there seems to be no room for an approach that relies heavily on making errors. Hence, Sucrose decided to avoid such variables at all costs and stick to her familiar methods in satisfying her curiosity. For instance, Sucrose had always been curious about whether she and Cat's Tail bartender Diona, both of whom have animal ears, had shared any ancestry. In fact, this was not a private matter, and most people would simply ask the question. But Sucrose was concerned that it would be a sensitive topic. She, for one, did not like people drawing attention to her ears. So, she resorted to the method she knew best, observation. For 1 whole month, Diona constantly had an unnerving sense that someone was secretly watching her. She assumed that one of the tavern patrons was stalking her, and was none too happy about it. Similar genome, but ultimately different ancestry. cat connection merits further study. Note, unable to obtain bone sample thus far. This is the conclusion that Sucrose had jotted down in her notebook based on her findings so far. Bioalchemy aside, Sucrose made one further discovery from this episode. That is to say, judging by the pair of cat ear spectacles she made for herself after the event, it would appear that she has finally come to comprehend a certain unique feline variety of cuteness. She is too shy to wear them in public, however, and only puts them on when alone in her room. Once every 3 days, Sucrose ventures into the real world at dusk. To her, these excursions are rare and momentous events. One by one, she visits the Butchers, the Adventurers Guild, and the Springvale Hunters, looking for material of a very specific kind. Hi, sorry, I'd like, the freshest, best quality bones you've got? Yep, the ones with the blood and meat still on? People found her behavior utterly unusual at first, but once they had gotten used to it, they were eager to oblige, even putting their rarest bones aside for her in advance. This was a major bonus for her. Not only was she able to acquire an ample supply of the usual chicken and boar bones, but she also got her hands on a complete lizard skeleton and even a chunk of a hilichurl leg bone still bearing fresh blood. Her eyes would light up with excitement at the sight of these strange and rare bones. She would thank Catherine of the Adventurers Guild profusely, bowing to her over and over. As well as going some way towards satisfying Sucrose's curiosity, she also found new inspiration from piecing new bones together. More importantly, collecting skeletons was her hobby, and she was crazy about it. One day, Sucrose happened to overhear a mother attempting to discipline her child. If you don't do as you're told, the scary old lady with the cloth sack over her back will come to your door, go into your room, pick out every bone from your body, and take them away. Sucrose's curiosity compelled her to investigate further. It turned out that this was nothing more than a ghost story used by mothers to shock their children into compliance, and that it had existed long before Sucrose was even born. She breathed a sigh of relief when she found out the truth. Soon after this, people noticed that Sucrose had switched her cloth sack for a leather one. Perhaps she did this just because she was shy, or perhaps it was to avoid arousing suspicion. As an assistant, Sucrose does everything she can to support Albedo, and even though his alchemical inquiries tend more towards the abstruse, she finds herself learning a lot every time. After an experiment lasting 5 straight days and nights came to its end, Albedo noticed that Sucrose was on the brink of collapsing from exhaustion and organized a mandatory 7-day vacation for her. Sucrose began her holiday determined to take a proper rest and regain her energy, but from the moment that she woke up on day 1, she struggled to adjust to the vacation lifestyle. First things first, let's get some breakfast. Fried eggs, sausages, and a cup of coffee. Nothing new to report there. All of these were foods and beverages that she had previously researched after all. Next she thought, how about a little rest and relaxation in the sun with a good book? Again, nothing new to report. Plenty of research shows this to be one of the most effective means of relaxation. There wasn't a book that she hadn't already read, and there wasn't a query she hadn't already highlighted, looked into, and later annotated. So then she did some household chores, laundry, dusting, and tidying. Check. Once again, nothing new to report. There was nothing to dispute about the fact that a clean and tidy environment is conducive to mental well-being. Half a day in, and Sucrose had not had the occasion to ask why or how even once. She was bored, restless, and angsty, and she could not calm herself down. She was desperate to throw herself at a research problem. It didn't matter what it was. She would have happily researched the potted plants on the terrace even if nothing came of it. Anything just to pass the time. But wherever she looked, the lampgrass to her left, the sweet flower in front of her, or the cecilia to her right, all she found were things that she had already previously researched in exhaustive detail. Finally, she gave up and forced herself to go to sleep. The next day, she reported to the laboratory first thing in the morning. All day long, you have nothing to research and nothing to question. That's not rest, it's torture. Sucrose's childhood was no different from anyone else's in Mondstadt. She had loving parents, she had her best friends. Life was simple and beautiful. Her most enduring childhood memory is a story she once heard about a wonderful paradise. Somewhere in a far-flung corner of Tevat, there was an undiscovered domain with pretty pink flowers the height of 100 people, teeny tiny floating fairies flying all over the place, and beautiful unicorns, the pinnacle of perfection. Sucrose and her 2 best friends believed that if they only could reach this magical place, they would surely live happily ever after. But time went by, and one of her friends left on a long journey with her adventurer parents, never to return. The other suffered a domestic tragedy. Her father fell ill and passed away. Her whole personality changed, and she broke off her friendship with Sucrose. The promise that they had once made to reunite someday in the future no longer meant anything. Sucrose felt lonelier then than she had ever felt before in her whole life. They hadn't even set eyes on paradise yet, and already her friends were gone. Well, even if they were destined to never meet again, Sucrose was desperate to honor their past friendship in some way. That was when she discovered the existence of alchemy from a book that she was reading. Sucrose realized, though she had never had the chance to find that entrance to that wonderful place, she now had the opportunity to be the creator of her own paradise. Thus began her study of bioalchemy, and she poured all of her curiosity and passion into it. Still, she has never once mentioned the story of paradise and her bygone friendships to anyone else. Perhaps one day, when that place she first learned of in a children's storybook finally becomes a reality in the real world, her friends will return. Sucrose has a set of strict requirements when it comes to the selection of species of her personal paradise. After experimentation, specimens that are up to standard she tags with pass. At first, she wanted to give exotic-sounding names to each of her plants, just like in the stories, but whenever she came to try and name something, she found herself completely at a loss for ideas. After spending so long as a scientist, she insisted on flawless logic even when it came to relatively trivial matters such as naming. Her earliest batch of names including the following: Grassflower, a flower that grows on grass; Flower grass, a grass that glows beneath flowers; Multigrass flower, a flower that grows on dense grass, and so on and so forth. Even such unparadisiacal names as these would take Sucrose forever to come up with, far longer than the duration of the experiments themselves. In the end, she gave up on naming altogether and simply used the specimen identifiers from her research notes instead. Yes, this meant the names ended up being much longer, but anyway, Sucrose is the creator of this paradise, so why shouldn't she get to name things any way she wants to? It was on an afternoon just like any other that Sucrose received her vision. Ready to begin her 159th dandelion seed simmering experiment, she poured her carefully crafted alchemical solution into the cauldron. Instantly, the cauldron hit boiling point and the entire room was filled with steam. Sucrose rushed to the cauldron, anxious to see what new transmutation had occurred this time. In her excitement, she even burned both of her hands on the lip of the cauldron. Much to her disappointment, however, the dandelion seeds had once again burned to a crisp. But there was something new there too. Lying amidst the black dandelion seeds was a vision. And yet, rather than pouring out the liquid and taking her vision, she first thought for a moment and then lit the fire up again to continue simmering the contents of the cauldron. She was curious to know what further reactions might occur between dandelion seeds and visions. Sadly, the experiment had ended in failure after 3 hours of constant simmering. Still, there was no denying that she had reaped a great reward from this experiment, for the elemental energy provided by her vision would become her single greatest asset in her future bioalchemical endeavors. And those are all of Sucrose's stories. She hasn't appeared much in the main story, but does have a role in certain event quests, such as the Chalk Prince and the Dragon event. She's also the last 4-star from launch, so starting next week we'll finally see some 5-star characters in this series. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all in the next video.